Hey, welcome everybody to Cycle Jerks Podcast, episode 137. I'm Mike Stewart, your host, and joined as always by the lovely and talented Dave Dalton. Dave, how you
Yeah,
doing?
I'm good. And even though I'm having technological challenges again this morning, I'm in a good mood. I'm not going to complain. I'm not going to waste the airtime complaining.
All
So,
right, good. So,
but yeah, I'm good. All good.
have you started your new job yet?
Start Monday. Assuming I pass the TB test, I start Monday. So
Okay.
yeah.
Like TB,
So
like tuberculosis?
yeah, you literally have to go get
Wow.
you have to go get a skin test, which I have to do at 11:40 today.
All
So
right. Well, there you go.
still holding out hope, though. I do have a couple of other prospects cooking. I applied for a couple of things late last week, and they'd be really cool if they came through. So
Sure.
we'll see.
Yeah, okay.
But
Cool.
shaping young minds is not a bad thing.
Yeah. Yeah, well, this week we're joined by Kyle Smith. He's a bicycle lawyer, and oh, he's just now joining us. All
Look at
right,
that.
Kyle, how are you? We can't hear you.
He's a lawyer. He's not.
Uh-huh.
See, this is what happens when you have little kids. You have to rush around every morning, right, Kyle?
Yeah. All right. Well, Dave, while Kyle's getting his volume figured out, why don't you talk about this week's sponsor?
This week's sponsor, well, I think we mentioned it last week, but Trail Boss, our friend Jeff Linoski, you've known him for years. I got to
Yep.
know him through the bike shop. Uh, I mean, obviously just an amazing human, but his thrilled about his Trail Boss Academy, where they hold clinics, on trail clinics, and it can do one-on-one coaching as well. So if you want to learn to ride like a boss, look them up. But most importantly, they have two big ones coming out in two big events in Arizona. So check out the links that we posted, and a couple of days out in the deserts or the trails of Arizona. I shouldn't say the desert. But just great stuff, and you're going to learn from the best if you go to one of his academies for sure.
Yeah, and online, he's got a ton of online content, a bunch of how-tos, really good stuff.
Yeah,
Cons-
yeah.
He's a consummate pro, Jeff Lenoski.
Yeah, and he's
30
got a
some odd
super cool,
years. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
super cool van, and he's also thrown himself behind some great causes like Candide. So check it out.
Yes. All right, Kyle.
Let's see if the audio works now. Can
Hey,
you hear
all
me?
right.
Hey, all
Yeah.
right.
Oh my God, it's so loud.
Beautiful. Excellent.
Yeah.
All right, Kyle. Well, hey, thanks for joining us.
30th problem to solve today. So
wow. You get up
my
early.
day starts early.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. Yeah. Well,
How are you, man?
Doing all right. Good to see you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks for joining. Look at that. And he has a bike helmet in his
Oh,
filing cabinet
Good
there.
staging.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I do ride to my office, though it's saying I ride to work. It's like generous because I think it's like about half mile from my house. So it's like,
Yeah.
like, oh, how long's your ride? I was like, about like, 2 minutes.
Right.
Yeah, it's funny. Similarly, when I substitute teaching, I was a mile and a half up the street.
Oh, yeah.
But I had this one guy on Strava that no matter what, we're always within like a couple miles of each other at the end of the year. So I was recording all of those because I was like, I can't let this guy beat me, right? And he's telling me those don't count. I'm like, no, I'm pedaling a bike. So
That's
you're
right.
on a
Yeah.
bike, you're on a bike, you're commuting to work.
During the pandemic, I was still going to my office because place I worked at, no one else was in the office. There was only like 4 people there, Anyway, I remember one time Strava was like, "Hey man, great news! You got the local legend of this like one like quarter-mile stretch on like through like a Berkeley back road on your commute to the office." And I'm like, "Oh, what a badge of honor!"
Right. Did you go back and try to get the KOM?
Yeah, KOM on a fully flat 100-yard section.
Yeah. Blow
Funny.
it out. Well,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
so Kyle, we're always curious, like where'd you grow up? Where'd you get and how'd you get started with bikes?
Yeah, so I got started. I grew up mostly in Danville, but my dad worked for Chevron, so we moved around a lot. Lived in Nigeria as a little kid.
Wow.
Yeah, but I got into bikes. I mean, really a large part through my dad, and my parents both ride. But at first road biking, I was like, oh, that's like something like my dad does. So I raced BMX bikes in like middle school, and into high school a little bit, and then got more into mountain bikes, and then after I came back to the Bay Area to go to law school, bought a road bike, and was like, well, when you're when you're in the Bay Area, that's the thing to do. I was before that I was living in Brooklyn and riding around New York City, but that's less pleasure riding, and that's more just like adrenaline of car dodging.
Yeah. Yeah, like riding around San Francisco or something,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's more of a war zone than a cruise.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he might be understating it a little bit though. In the interest of full disclosure, I mean, I've known Kyle for a long time, but I'm good friends with his parents, and to say that they're into biking is
Yeah.
probably an understatement. They're veterans of a multiple RAGBRAIs, right?
Yep. Yeah,
And
that's right.
then the last time when they were living in Thailand, they used to
Yeah.
do these. What's the name of those things they used to do? They were basically scavenger hunts on
Yeah, it's
bikes.
called the bike hash, and
Yeah.
that's one of the most fun things you could do on a bike. So in a lot of the expat communities, they have it for running, the Hash House Harriers. It's like a very like British thing, but in Bangkok they had the Bangkok Bike Hash, and this is like this crazy kind of like mixed dirt and gravel. I don't think they had gravel bikes by name at the time, but that would have been the thing to have, because you're on roads, you're riding through dirt roads in the fields and stuff like that. But at one point the trail may fork and send you in two different directions, so you have to send a scout group down each one to figure out where the ride's actually continuing. It's like one part group ride, one part scavenger hunt. But they say it's a drinking club with a biking problem, I think, is their it's kind of the thing there. So
I think I belong to that. I think I belong to that club.
yeah. It's a party on bikes in true expat fashion.
Yeah. Well, that's Ragbri too, as far as I know. I've never been, but I hear it's just wild.
RAGBRAI, yeah, I haven't done RAGBRAI yet. I mean, that's definitely on the bike bucket list. But yeah, from what I hear there, it's you're doing your whatever 65 miles a day on bike, and then you see like a group doing it on unicycles or penny farthings, and you're kind of like, all right, well, maybe I'm not so hardcore just riding 100K on my carbon fiber road bike. It's like some dude unicycling backwards, or I think some guy rollerbladed it, where you're just like, all right, man, that's pretty far.
Yeah.
There's always somebody that's got a little bit more to prove, whether you're
it's like
racing or riding or whatever.
Yeah, it's like the guys who run beta breakers backwards dressed as salmon. You're just like, I love the commitment to the bit,
Yeah.
I did the Grizzly Peak Century, and there was a guy sitting on his handlebars pedaling. He's facing backwards, sitting on his handlebars, pedaling the whole 100 miles. It's like, all right,
oh my God.
All right. Yeah,
you're like, it was enough for me to finish, man. Like,
yeah.
Yep. Well, I wonder you see those guys in the tracklocross,
Oh, it's nuts.
Yeah, those guys are out on the course, and it's always just, it's bananas. Yeah.
Yeah, there's always the riding disciplines that I'm like, man, you guys have a little something I don't, like the indoor go-kart track racing.
Oh yeah.
That's some cool stuff.
That looks super fun.
Yeah. That's fun. I was like, I like to watch that. People are like, you got to get in here next year. I'm like, oh, I think I'm busy that day. Oh, yeah. I didn't tell you what day. Oh, right. I should have waited.
What do they call that thing? Is it Rad Race or there's some name for it
it's part of like the Red Bull series.
Yeah.
So it's like part of like the hill climb and part of the Red Bull series. But I like gears. I like shifting. I'll take the mechanical advantage wherever you got it.
Yeah. It's called wisdom. As you get older.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Those are young man games. young
Yeah,
person
I mean,
games.
now I feel like I'm flying anytime I'm on my bike and I don't have two kids attached to me in the trailer. You
Oh,
know, it's like
nice.
I feel like, oh, what's your training? And I was like, 50 pounds of kids plus a Thule trailer.
That'll get it done.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that turns 10 miles into quite an adventure.
So okay, so we got your cycling background. How about
Yeah.
the lawyer aspect of it? So was the were you always thinking like, hey, I'm gonna be a lawyer, I'm gonna be a, and then after you kind of got into it, it was like, oh, well, there's actually this lane here I could just focus on something that I really care about as opposed to, you know, defending
Yeah.
crooks and creeps.
Lane being an appropriate term. Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of knew I always wanted to go into law. I thought it would sort of fit my skill set. And when I went to law school, I was definitely part of the hey, it's 2008, what are we doing? Law school crowd. So I didn't know exactly, what I wanted to go into with law. But I did pretty well my first year, and so you can interview to work at the big corporate firms, and they can offer you a job before you graduate, and you think, oh, this is great, I'm gonna have a job. That
Yeah.
hadn't really had a good one of those since graduating college in the recession. And so I go to work there and I'm all excited for it, and pretty quickly they're like, hey, so you're going to be part of the Bank of America foreclosure team. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know what I wanted to do as a lawyer, but turns out that's not it. And so I made it about a year and a half. And at my review, they were like, hey, man, you don't seem passionate about what we do. Like, thanks for noticing.
Yeah.
So I spent, a couple years kind of in this sort of, corporate litigation world, and just wasn't really loving it. And a friend of mine was working at a bike law firm. And she said, I saw her and she's like, oh, how do you like, what you're doing? I'm like, not really. She's like, well, you seem to like love bikes, want to come work for us? And I was like, I didn't know that was a thing you could do. So sure. And so that was about 8 years ago. And since then I've been, only representing cyclists. And then about a year and a half ago, started my own practice, and, can really kind of just devote into it. And, when you're at a big firm, you kind of have to take big cases, but I love now being out on my own. People are like, this might be smaller than a lawyer wants to handle. I'm kind of like, no, man, if you were on a bike and you're hurt, I want to help. It's not just, trying to turn a profit. It's getting to do something you like with people you care about, and, a community that you value. So that's kind of been my legal journey to here.
But it is interesting, that you were approached by your friend, because this is all I do, right? Is ride my
Right.
bike after I'm, right. So my only other, but I would have, to be honest, I was actually run off the road on Mount
Mm.
Diablo, right? And in retrospect, I probably had a pretty good case, but I
Yeah.
would have never thought of specifically like a bike attorney. If you didn't exist, I wouldn't have known they existed. That was, as Mike said, a lane.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I think that it's an interesting thing, because people will ask me, they're like, oh, is bike law its own, specific, field of law? And I said, well, not really. It's kind of within the umbrella, I guess, largely of personal injury or products liability. But I do think it's always different. Like when I'm dealing with bike cases, you're dealing with the auto insurance companies for the most part. And 99% of what they do is probably just two cars hit each other. And so especially with property damage, they don't really know what to do with bikes. Most of these people are sitting in an office somewhere that's not, a real bike friendly place, and probably haven't ridden a bike in 25 years. So, when they hear that a bike was totaled, they're like, oh, what was that? Like 500, $600? And you're like, no. This
Yeah.
actually was a prototype Specialized Athos. So it's a little bit
Yeah.
more than that. And so I think that, the advantage, right, with it is that it's a different population with a different kind of health profile and a different set of needs, really, than what you're dealing with in your kind of typical auto collisions, which is what a lot of personal injury attorneys focus on.
You know,
Yeah.
it's interesting because I do think that there is, as you said, a little bit of that ignorance out there if you're not in the cycling community. I know that when I got hit by the car, what
Yeah.
they put me through to prove that my bike was worth $4,700. Like, I'm taking pictures, I had to go dig
Right.
up the original receipt. And so these guys really were like, okay, we've got to understand this. My friend had his Colnago stolen. It was like
Ugh.
$11,000.
Yeah.
And I don't think the insurance company wanted to deal with it. They were just like, whatever. Here's $11,000. Like,
Right.
so, there's probably just some confusion on both ends, and some want to invest the time and some don't. So
Yeah, and I think and that's the thing that's weird about bikes, that I'll never forget too, where I had it was a client, he had his bike was, totaled, and it was a light speed titanium bike, and the insurance adjuster is like, well, I found one on eBay that for, whatever it was, X amount of money. So I think that should be fair. And I was like, that seems like a really low price. Can you send me the link to that? And she sends it to me, and it's like a frame size, like 62. And I was like, oh, my client's 5'6". She's like, what do you mean? And I was like, yeah, I guess Toyota Priuses don't come in sizes, but like,
Yeah.
my client can't ride this. It's functionally like a tall bike, like, some sort of like,
Yeah.
some sort of like Burning Man prop. You're like, and it was just funny, the insurance adjuster was like, they come in sizes. Oh,
see,
you're
there
like,
you
yeah,
go.
man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
It's the ignorance of it. Yeah.
it's
Right.
interesting too, because I've had some bikes stolen, and I always
Mm,
found the insurance company, like, I always tell them, like, I work in the bike business. I can replace these
right.
bikes at a wholesale cost. They're like,
Right.
well, no, we need retail receipts. It's like, and then they'd pay me retail. It's like, it's kind of wacky. So it's I guess it's up to each individual insurance company. You had an insurance company that was going the other way,
Right.
shopping Craigslist and eBay to try to
Yeah.
find a cheap replacement. Yeah. So yeah,
Well,
it's
a
all,
lot of times too, it depends on whether you're dealing with first party or third party insurance. So when you're dealing with the other guy's insurance, they don't want to, they don't care about keeping you as a customer. When you're dealing with your own insurance, they're a little bit nicer. They kind of want to keep you happy, keep you as a customer. But
yeah.
yeah, you see things like that where you're just kind of like, do you guys not talk to each other?
Right.
Like one company's like, oh, great, we'll just cut the check. And the other's like, we don't believe bikes exist. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
man, you guys kind of all over the place, huh?
Yeah. They're probably working from a script,
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
third party or first party. Well,
Yeah, that's right.
so
To be clear though, let me just clarify one thing, Mike.
Yeah.
Uh, so you mentioned it before, but it's kind of falls into the bucket of personal injury, but
Yeah.
you are representing cyclists that have been involved in accidents. You're not representing cyclists against a defective bike or.
No, I do that too.
Oh, you
Yeah,
do? Oh, okay.
I've done that too. I've had a handful of you know, unique situations. I mean, it's more rare, fortunately, I think, in the world of bikes, because, especially if you're buying from, reputable shops, reputable manufacturers, you don't see as much stuff. But I mean, things happen. Trek and Bontrager had that issue. They did a recall on their handlebars a couple of years ago when they were kind of breaking off at one point. Kern had an issue where there was a faulty weld on the joint of some folding bikes that were basically falling in half. But fortunately, I think a lot of things with bikes, the issue can be detected before failure happens, sort of in motion.
Mhm.
And so I've handled, I don't know, half dozen defective products cases in my career, but they seem to be more rare in the world of bikes for whatever reason. I think in large part because if you're buying from a good shop, the mechanics are going to find it, but kind of before it gets out to the customer, and inspect it when it comes out of the box, and you're like, oh, we got something that it's faulty here, send it back.
Yeah.
I have to imagine though that there's a potential, because I've been ranting about this recently. For whatever reason, it's like e-bikes is my thing now,
Oh
and I
man.
imagine there's a fair number of those potential, because there's so many cheap shit
Oh my
e-bikes that are
God.
out there that just can't be, that we know aren't safe. So I imagine it's
Yeah. That I think is that man, I I'm with you there. The sort of like these direct to consumer. Yeah, I mean, for me, the idea of buying a bike you've never ridden seems like borderline insane, unless your buddy has the exact same one or whatever. But yeah, I've seen so many. I've had a lot of clients who are on these, direct to consumer, shipped from mainland China, stuff like that, kind of e-bikes, and they're just so poorly built that I haven't had many yet where there's a product liability issue. But even just a smaller thing is that if you are hit by a car, or do have some sort of accident and the bike gets messed up, a lot of times they're impossible to fix because they have these kind of wacky, OEM parts that you can't find here, and they're almost designed to fail, to like, oh, I guess you have to buy a whole new bike. And
Yeah.
but yeah, I just don't trust to these bikes. I've seen them where they're putting, big batteries, big motors on something with mechanical disc brakes, and you're just like, hey, the pads aren't seated right. It's going to wear out real fast with this heavy bike and these wimpy brakes. But I think that people just see, oh, well, I can get an e-bike for $1,000 and it says it goes, X miles per hour. I think people don't know what to look for, and you're like, yeah, you're going to want to be more concerned about how to get back to 0 than how to get to 30.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know there's been a real issue with the charging of the batteries and fires, and
Right.
a lot of stuff can happen with these budget e-bikes. I was
Yeah.
going to ask before, what kind of on Dave's question, because I know obviously there's bike accidents, right? People get hit by cars,
Sure.
or they run into each other. That's probably a big part of what you do. But there's also road hazards, and then we already talked about
Yeah.
product liability. I had when I was working retail, I had a customer. He was doing a big group ride, and they had just replaced all the sewer drains in Pleasanton,
Oh.
and
Mm-hmm.
they did not have the straps across them. And
Yep.
sadly, this guy dropped into one of those sewer
Uh,
drains, and his bike broke in half, and he actually suffered a spinal cord injury, and
oh
was in
my
it.
God. That's
Yeah,
horrible.
it was terrible. And I know he got paid, but it was still just devastating. So how often do you encounter these road conditions where something's just askew, and
Mm-hmm.
the city didn't execute quite properly, or whoever was doing the job? Is that a big part of it, or is it more just collisions and running off the road type stuff?
Yeah, I've handled a good number of those cases. And I think the one that you brought up, it illustrates that there's really kind of two different types of road hazards. There's one that's essentially, created, like installing a storm drain without lateral bars that prevent bike tires from going in, or I had a case where they were doing road work and they put the metal plates on the road, but the metal plates just didn't join fully. So there's this, well, it was more than 25 millimeters across, so a tire can slip in it and cause an accident. And then there's sort of the other kind of thing that's really just like road degradation, where pothole forms, weather opens something up, or there's road washout. And the first of those, the man-made conditions, present a lot stronger cases because they have a duty to not create a dangerous condition on public property. It's a lot harder to make a case over things like potholes. Essentially, in a case against a private individual, car hits bike, you have a 2-year statute of limitations. You can make a claim against that person or file a lawsuit, within 2 years to preserve your right. In claims against the government, you can't sue the government directly. They have what's called sovereign immunity. The only way to make a claim against the government is going through the California Government Tort Claims Act. So you have a 6-month window rather than 2 years to even make that claim. And you can't sue the government for negligence, only for dangerous condition of public property. Basically, there's no surprise that the people in charge of writing the rules wrote them, I guess, a little bit, in their favor.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, go
but
figure.
yeah, exactly. And so the government has to have known about it, or, if it's kind of so bad that it's absurd that they didn't know about it, but then they have to fix it within a reasonable time frame, which again is kind of murky legal definition of, well, how soon is that? But certainly with things like, dangerous storm drains or, improper signage during construction, things like that, where, the road was safe and then, the city or construction company affirmatively did something that made it unsafe. Those are, real strong cases, and I've handled a lot of those. I've won a couple pothole cases, but again, those are just, that's a Hail Mary every time.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think I remember that was at least at one time the same thing with cars. Like if you got a
Right.
flat tire in a pothole, if you were the first bastard to go through there, the poor
Right.
soul that went through there, you're out of luck. If you're the second one, you have a case, right? So
Yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. The 10th person to, get hurt on something. I once had a case where they had stripped off the whole road surface over on San Pablo Dam Road, and I think 16 cyclists went down all within like one weekend. And
Oh, wow.
that's one of those things where you're kind of like, I think the signage was proper, and you're like, well,
I
Yeah.
think so.
after the first guy, maybe not.
Yeah.
Certainly by the 10th, you may want to reevaluate rough road, ahead and be a little more specific.
I
Yeah.
think your business should start booming pretty soon, though, with these with all the new roundabouts that they're
Oh my
installing, because
God.
that's such a it's such a clusterfuck.
I live
Yeah.
right by. I live right by the one at Pleasant Hill Road in Olympic.
Oh God, that's the one.
Yeah, yeah. That's like I live on the Lafayette Moraga bike trail. It's like right outside my
Okay.
front door, and that thing, nobody knows how to use it. It's like
Yeah.
people are like stopping and trying to wave someone through. You're like, absolutely not the point of a roundabout, man.
Yeah. Well,
We all yield.
This time motorists are actually being nice to each other because they're all letting the other person go, and it's defeating the purpose,
I
right?
know. Yeah, they have that new one too, in Alamo, and it's just funny watching. It's like watching like a nature documentary of like monkeys approaching like a new tool for the first time. It's like, how does roundabout work? You're like, no, just drive, man. Good.
I do, last summer we went to Europe and there are roundabouts everywhere. There's
Oh yeah.
everywhere. And I felt like, this really effective way of getting people to slow down, take inventory, work together and get through a situation. I found them to be pretty effective. They were a nuisance, for sure,
Mhm.
because it slowed you down or whatever. But
Right.
yeah, I don't know. I think it's a pretty good, as opposed to having a street lamp and,
Right.
all the things associated with a street light,
Don't be
They
wrong.
work.
I'm a fan. They work. Like, go
Yeah.
ahead. Yeah, they work. It's just that people don't know how they're supposed to work.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
it's funny because it's like it's a cultural thing. It's like, education thing. Like one of the most common types of cases I deal with is dooring cases, because
Yeah.
people, in the United States, we open the car door with your left hand. In, Denmark, Holland stuff, they teach people open that car door with your right hand, so that you have to turn over and you kind of look behind you. And, it's funny things like that, right? That it's like, it's not technology, it's just culture. And, we don't know how to use roundabouts. And I give the example of the roundabout near my house. They have, we asked the traffic engineer, hey, it might be safer if we have a raised sidewalk, and it'll help people slow down because they're coming in at like 45 miles an hour. And of course there's the signage to slow down. And the traffic engineer, to his credit, fully realistic, he's like, yeah, I don't want to put a raised curb because I'm worried a car is just going to launch off of it. And
Yeah.
it's this catch-22, right? You're like, well, this will slow them down. And he's like, yeah, but if they're not already slowed down, it's going to be a whole lot worse.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, yeah, So, I mean, I guess if we start putting them in, eventually, I'm sure, now they work in Europe, but I'm sure the first one, people were just like, what is this? How does this work?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, so I'm pretty curious that the timing of you coming on is pretty good, because we do have in the cycling community, there's a
Mm.
rider in Sacramento, Derek Teal. He was recently involved in a hit and run accident, and he was left.
Did you see
I mean,
that one, Kyle? Did you see it?
No, I hadn't heard about that. That's
Uh,
awful.
It was brutal too. He was basically left on the road to die in the
Jesus.
middle of nowhere. And they were able to get him. He's now multiple surgeries.
My
And
God.
they actually caught the person who did it.
Whoa.
That just happened this past week. And so, but it's an 18-year-old kid,
Right.
right? So in a situation like this where felony hit and run, you have somebody that sustained a wild amount of injuries and a lot of surgeries. I'm guessing probably hundreds of thousands of dollars of medical.
Easy.
Yeah. And you got an 18-year-old kid that's not capable of paying, I mean, hopefully he has insurance, who knows?
Right.
But I guess my question is, in that instance, what is there anything that the person that got injured could do in an effort to beyond it? Let's just say worst case scenario, the driver doesn't have insurance. Is it completely on the injured party at that point to take care of it and his insurance company, or is there another avenue for somebody in that situation?
You know, in that situation, it's hard to say. So in California, the minimum insurance requirement is $15,000 for liability insurance to just legally for a driver to be on the road.
Yep.
Fortunately, that is going up to 30,000 soon, which is kind of crazy. It's
Nothing.
I remember talking to an adjuster. It's 25,000 in Alabama where things cost a lot less. So fortunately, we're raising that up. But I see this situation all the time, where if you get, hit and run, even if they catch the person, high percentage shot that person's either uninsured and that's why they fled, or has almost zero insurance. The best thing that cyclists can do, in my opinion, and I feel like I'm like, this close to just going door to door to spread the good word, is get your uninsured motorist coverage really boosted up. Because if you are involved in a hit and run, or you're hit by someone with really limited insurance, the best protection you can have is UIM, which is your uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage that's a part of your auto policy.
Help me here. I don't even know what it is. Is it on there automatically and you can up the amount, or do you have to get it?
Yeah, so it should be on there automatically unless you it's something where you would pretty much have to specifically exclude it, when you're buying insurance, but it's on your auto policy. And so I always tell cyclists, hey, look at your auto policy and see what your policy limits are. Because if you're hit by a driver, if it's a hit and run, or even if they stick around at the scene, right, they may stick around and be the nicest person in the world, call the ambulance for you. But if they only have $15,000 of insurance, well, that could get eaten up by your out-of-pocket medical costs really quick. But if you have good uninsured motorist coverage, that will cover you when you're on your bike or pedestrian or a passenger in someone else's car, kind of whatever, as long as you are injured by an uninsured or underinsured motorist. And the crazy thing about it is how cheap the coverage is. To boost up your UIM. I remember one time I did it, when I was first starting to do bike injury cases, and I was kind of like, wow, I didn't know this would cover you on your bike. I should boost mine way higher. And I remember it was an extra $70 a year or something crazy, where I was like, that's it? I thought this was going to be prohibitively expensive. But I always say that's the best coverage a cyclist can have. And for people for people who tell me oh, well, I don't have a car, so I can't get that, you can actually even get what's called a non-owner operator policy, where you can buy auto insurance to cover you as a driver, even if you don't own a car. A lot of times people in San Francisco or New York who travel for work will get it because it's cheaper than just buying the rental insurance every time. But you can get uninsured motorist coverage even if you don't own a car. And in fact, at that point, it's a lot cheaper, because you can call and be like, hey, Geico, I don't own a car. I want this just for the UIM, basically. And they'll write you a policy, and it's a lot cheaper even than, auto insurance for your own car.
All right, I'm glad I got up this morning because I didn't know this existed, and call Sue
You know,
right after this and
a lot of
but
people don't, and I feel like uh, I've had this conversation where people uh and it's gone both ways. Sometimes I have clients, oh man, like they check their uninsured motorists and they have a little but not a lot. And then I've had situations where a client's badly injured and I say, oh well, I have terrible news. The responsible driver only has a $15,000 policy. Why don't you check your UIM? Like, oh, I didn't even know if I have that. And they look and it's $500,000 or something, and they're like, wow, okay, thank God I did that
right.
10 years ago or whatever, when I bought this policy and just renewed it.
Yeah.
But I always say, yeah, that's like the best thing a cyclist can have, because in that situation, with the rider in Sacramento, if he has uninsured motorist coverage, he can get some help there. But otherwise, it's kind of tricky because you get these drivers, we call them judgment proof, because you can go to court and get a jury to say they owe you $1 million, but it's worth as much as the paper it's printed on if that guy's just going to leave the trial, walk down the hall, go to the bankruptcy court and file bankruptcy, and then poof, that judgment goes away.
I'm
Right.
curious,
So in other
being
words, in answer to Mike's question, there isn't really much they can do if they're underinsured
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is terrible. And because a lot of bike people don't have auto insurance kind of for a reason, right? They don't have a car. And so I always tell people it's worth getting like, the non-owner operator policy, or if you have any, friends or family members, get listed on their policy and pay them a little, pay them something to be on that, as a listed driver, just to get the uninsured motorist coverage.
now in an instant where the driver's 18,
Right.
would his parents still be liable for, because obviously at 18,
Right.
you don't have anything. Most kids don't.
Right.
I mean, they're still forming, but
Right.
the parents, does it go that route, or how does that work?
No, generally speaking, no. I mean, once you're, legally an adult, even if you're still living, with your parents, they won't have any negligence for your specific actions as they would with a minor driver. You can essentially impute that negligence to the parents. However, if the parents own the vehicle, if it's not titled in that 18-year-old's name, there can be some responsibility there on behalf of the vehicle owner rather than just the person driving it.
Got it.
But hopefully this young guy's on his parents' insurance and they have some really big time coverage on that car, so that the rider will be okay. But yeah, I've come across that more times than I can count. Where there's serious injuries and there's just not the insurance money, and a lot of times for me, that's how a case turns into a pro bono case real quick. We're just
Yeah.
like, I can't take any legal fee on something like this where you've kind of been this badly injured and there's so little money. Just
Yeah.
doesn't feel right. But that's not much of a resolution either. Of, hey, great news, you're getting a couple $1,000s more when you're seeing 6-figure hospital bills.
Yeah.
Clarity though, Mike used the number 18 and you said they're an adult. What if they're 16 or 17 and they're not legally an adult? Does that change the parents' liability?
Yeah, it does. Parents can be liable for the negligence of their children. Particularly it's like under sort of negligent supervision. And I've had cases where nominally the defendant, is the parent, but the action was performed by a child. I've had dogs get off leash because a kid was, handling a dog that was sort of too strong for them, and then run in, knock a cyclist down. I've seen kids on a bike trail who are just kind of swerving and go directly onto the wrong side of the road or whatever, and hit and take a cyclist out. So things can happen with minors causing injuries, especially you think a 16-year-old driver, 17-year-old driver. I've certainly had that happen as well. And if you end up filing a lawsuit in those situations, it will be against the parents rather than the minor.
Right. Okay. So what about like in a situation, you got
Mhm.
two people ride mountain bikes on a trail and,
Mm,
there's a collision, somebody gets really injured. Is,
yeah.
does that, does the uninsured motorist policy?
No.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
how,
So uninsured motorists only will provides coverage against driver. If you get hit by another cyclist, they'll say, well, it's not a motorist. There is an interesting gray area there when you talk about like e-bikes. That it is a motorized vehicle, but a lot of times the new policies will kind of specifically exclude that.
got it.
But in terms of pure, just let's say they're not e-bikes, so we don't have any gray area there, and it's just bike versus bike. It depends, obviously, who's at fault. It can happen where it's no one's fault. Let's say it's in a race situation, right? Like, hey, this is part of it. People get tangled, crashes happen in a crit. But, in terms of someone, not following the rules of the road, riding the wrong way in a bike lane or something really inherently dumb. If that person has some sort of non-auto liability coverage, you can make a claim against that, whether it's renters or homeowners or a personal liability umbrella policy. So I always say, like, I probably handled a case of just about every way someone could be injured on a bike. And then I'll get surprised. But yeah, I've had bike versus bike cases, unfortunately. Golf carts, dogs, um, and you see things where it's sort of not the typical, oh, there's obviously an auto policy here, but homeowners policies provide some pretty broad coverage a lot of times, or renters.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
interesting you mentioned that's an interesting one, the golf cart. I had a friend that
Mm-hmm.
was taken out by a golf cart.
Yeah.
He was actually an airline pilot. He was unable to fly for over a year. Was he? Is
Yeah.
this the guy? Oh,
Yeah, I think we're
okay.
talking about the same thing.
He's a dear friend of
Yeah.
mine, but he couldn't
Yeah.
fly for over a year, and
Yeah.
he couldn't ride his bike. I mean, it was holy God. Yeah, it was awful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
No, I
in
mean,
the,
Okay.
it's terrible. And I mean, I think, people in cars are aware, like, oh, this can do a lot of damage. Everyone knows that cars can do that. But I think sometimes people in other, on a bike, on a golf cart with their dog, you don't always think about, like, this can be sort of a high consequence type of situation.
for sure.
And I think
The
that people
dog.
can, let their guard down a little bit, where they're, you know, not in their car and, kind of in a situation where they really know they can do damage.
Right. And hey, golfers drink. Just
Yeah,
putting it out
that's right.
there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
So,
So
I'm gonna get to the. Oh, go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
all right, in the Bay Area, we've had like there was this woman who took out a bunch of cyclists. And then she
Oh,
got put
are you talking about
away.
on the House of Pain ride?
I'm not sure exactly.
I guess this probably happens more time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
unfortunately, like, yeah.
but she ended up going to
Oh,
jail.
that.
Then she got out and then she did it again.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So have you encountered any situations where it was like on purpose?
Mm.
Or at least the situation surrounding it was very suspicious to where it seemed like this was like an act of violence.
Absolutely. Yeah. Unfortunately, I have seen that. There's sort of different levels of maliciousness. When you have a collision, there's just pure negligence, which is just, oh my gosh, the sun was in my eyes, I'm so sorry. Or, I had a tire blowout and drifted lanes, hit someone. There's no malicious intent, and it's, you're responsible for the damage you do.
Yeah.
But in a legal sense, they don't like hold it against you in any, morally responsible sense.
Yeah.
And then above that, there's, what I would call reckless behavior, just doing 50 miles an hour in a school zone, passing on a double yellow, things that it's just like, but like, this is going to lead to, bad consequences. And then above that, we have, intentional acts. And I remember there was a ride up in Marin or Petaluma or something like that a couple of years ago, and a young driver took out 6 cyclists. He ended up doing some jail time. And so in that situation, you can make a claim against the driver's insurance, the same as if it were negligence, because they're responsible for the damage they do. But the district attorney's office can also file criminal charges against that person for battery or attempted murder, or assault with a deadly weapon, kind of depending on what the circumstances warrant. But yeah, unfortunately, I've seen sort of intentional violence against cyclists.
I don't know that I want to know the answer to this because, we've all been buzzed by a car, intentionally buzzed by a car, but does that happen a lot where it's an intentional thing? Or is that kind of an anomaly? Or, the negligence, the stupidity negligence thing I get, but the intentional, that's kind of spooky to me.
It is, I don't think it's that common. I probably see it, more than most people, right? Because, people are coming to me sort of with these types of things. Like about almost exactly a year ago that the East Bay Bike Party last February 2023, there was actually a handful of intentional doorings where cars would drive up alongside cyclists and just open the doors, into them. And a couple people were injured pretty badly. Most people were just kind of either, spooked or, went down, but kind of got back up, scraped elbow sort of thing. And I think it's overall relatively rare. I think it makes news when it happens because it is such a, it's a shock to the senses in a way that, it doesn't exactly make headlines to just be like 2 cars collide on freeway. You're like, yeah, that, accidents happen. We know that. And I think these things kind of, shock the conscience. And so you hear about them. That said, they absolutely do happen. And I don't know why. And in that situation where it kind of happened with like 4 different vehicles all on the same night, you don't know if it was, there was some sort of collusion that they intended to do this, but it was all stolen vehicles too that got abandoned later. We got plates and it just kind of led nowhere. But, in that case, that was another situation where it kind of came down to like who has uninsured motorist coverage and who doesn't. And those are the people who were getting, their bills covered, and the people who were, kind of left out of luck.
It almost comes off like a sick game, when you think about for the stolen cars and the people get,
there was some crazy thing happening, and I only learned about it through this. It was called like the Kia Boys, where it was like this weird criminal social media crossover where there was this technical exploit in Kia specifically through a couple years. They made them crazy easy to steal. And people were stealing them and joyriding them and posting their videos on like TikTok or whatever. And just like joyriding and crashing these, sort of intentionally just like crashing and messing up these vehicles. So we don't know if this was a part of that. Nothing ever really surfaced online of people boasting about it, or if it was just one of those things that you don't know what would motivate a person to do something so kind of like horrible, just with also no motive, just pure random.
It's a sick game. It's a sick game.
Yeah.
Let's extend it even to the people that are buzzing the motorists. It's just
rolling
sick.
coal.
Yeah. It's just sick, and one day they're going to miscalculate, right? And just get too close.
What about this new law, the 3-foot law? So, is that something that could be actionable in the event? Let's just say, so for years I used to ride out Mines Road all the time, like 3-4 days a week I was out there, and there was this woman in this truck. She had a big water tank in the back of her truck, so it was very obvious the same person. And she would come so close to me. She'd honk. She'd give me the finger. She was just like an antagonist,
Yeah.
And we're out there, and there's no one out there, it's just me and her. And like, it's, anyway. But in a situation like that, where you're being harassed by somebody, and what is required to actually take one of these 3-foot, take that 3-foot law into account? Do you have to have video footage, or is it even actionable?
Yeah, I think in the situation you're mentioning that starts to almost constitute like civil harassment.
mhm,
Because you would need a pattern. In general, if someone just passes way too close, in civil law, you really only have you can have a claim for anything, but if you don't have damages, it kind of doesn't really matter. You could go and sue them for $0 for a declaration that they violated the law, but what's the
right.
point? So certainly when people are injured, that 3-foot law comes into play as, showing liability. But in the situation you're mentioning, where it's like the same person, having video certainly helps. But having the same person doing it over and over again, when you see that, it starts to become a pattern. It might be intentional. It might be the kind of thing where you could, go to the police with it, because I mean, as Dave said, it's a matter of time before there's, a miscalculation.
Yeah.
And it's not just like, oh, I'm going to annoy these cyclists. I mean, I don't know how cycling became the only sport that enrages people.
Yeah.
I don't know anyone out there who's just like volleyball players.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
well, I take that back. I guess pickleball.
Yeah.
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 The pickleball controversies. Yeah.
I think it's a power dynamic, right? It's
Yeah.
like somebody's in their big, powerful car, all comfortable, and then you're out there on this little skinny, tired thing. You're just completely vulnerable. It's
Yeah.
if anybody was ever bullied as a child or whatever, you know what I mean? It's like
Right.
all the psychological baggage
Yeah.
kind of represented in this conflict, potential
And
conflict.
it's crazy that, you would think that with better technology and everything like that, road deaths would be going down.
Right.
But there was a New York Times study that showed, since I think it was like 2009 or so, but essentially over the last 15 years or so, for the longest time through the 90s into the 2000s, these road fatalities were actually going down, and then they started going back up. And I think a large part of it too is like cars are getting bigger, they take longer to stop, and you see the hood height of trucks went from like a Ford Ranger has the same bed size, then as now, but somehow the car weighs like 5 times as much and is, 15 feet tall. And you're just like,
Right.
what are these and who is this for?
Yeah.
We had the woman from the California Bike Coalition brought up that exact point, is the fronts of the cars are so high, it's very hard for, for cyclists to be visible. So,
Yeah.
distracted driving. I have distracted driving. I mean, it's funny you mentioned that House of Pain. I mean, that's my ride. I wasn't there that day, but it affected a couple of friends of
Yeah.
mine. Footage was spooky, and that was just negligence. I mean, that was just like you said, that was just a stupid move, right?
Yeah, I would say I would put that into the reckless category, certainly.
Yeah.
If you're speeding, crossing a double yellow, that's
Yeah. Well,
But to
and
the same-
when you
but,
when you
to-
when
go
you
ahead.
brought up the fatalities, I mean, I couldn't help but think about the cell phone.
Yeah.
People are on their phone constantly. Uh, I'm in sales. I drive around,
Yeah.
and it's really hard. It is challenging to like be disciplined about like,
Right.
yeah, I hear this thing going off. I'm not dealing with it.
Right.
And
Putting that in, Mike, I'm putting that in the same category. That's why I'm
Right.
bringing that up.
Yeah.
It could say, okay, well, she was doing 55 in a 45 and she crossed a double yellow line, but you're doing 55 and you're looking down and texting your kid.
What's the
or
difference?
what's
Yeah.
the difference?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you add in smartwatches now. It's like, oh, finally, we have a new way to alert us.
Yeah.
You're just like,
Right.
your phone connects to your car, your phone connects to your watch. You're just like, oh man, like we needed one more way to,
Right.
have our phone alert us. But yeah, I mean, you're right. I get it that it's not just that people are like, I want to like, watch YouTube while I'm driving or something kind of insane. It's like, yeah, like you're getting it. I get alerts from my kids' preschool, about like stuff throughout the day. I'm getting, texts from clients, calls from clients. And I think you really do have to, I think it's a little easier as, a bike person to be like, oh, I know the consequence of this. I don't want to, hurt someone, but I get it. The companies have there's a lot of people, or a lot of companies with a lot of vested interest to make a lot of money in holding our attention,
Yeah.
in devices. And I think that people have never been more distracted, and that it's something you have to like consciously be aware of, as it's kind of crept up.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. Well,
So Kyle, let me ask the question that
Mhm.
as almost, I mean, this has been great, but the main reason
Mm.
like I had you on. So in the midst of all this, all these things that happen, is it just my imagination, or is there a bias that it's, even in the cases of dooring and whatnot, that there's a bias to the liability is on the cyclist? I mean, you hear these stories that, the insurance companies are going to try to pin it on. I think even I could be wrong, but I think in the golf cart thing, they try to say somehow that my friend was at fault, right?
Mhm.
But you see that, or in the police report, right? They'll write it up, and it's like, oh, the cyclist could have done this to avoid it, or somehow that it seems to be that there's shared blame when quite often there isn't. Is that my imagination, or is that just urban legend, or what?
And maybe I'm biased, but I think that there is. I do definitely see that. That's sort of like my joke, is that there's certain police departments that, like pick up the phone and they're like, a car hit a bike. We'll be right there to find out why the bike's at fault. Don't worry. And
yeah.
you're like,
Yeah.
that's, and I see things where, just like you're saying though, Dave, where they get it wrong and they blame the cyclist. And I think that's sometimes where that's where I add value, where I'm representing people in that situation. I have a case that is probably going to go into litigation because the insurance company said, well, we know he was in a bike lane and he got doored, but it sounds like he rides this bike lane a lot. So he really should have been looking out for doors. And you're just like, just like, you're like, yeah, he got punched, but it kind of feels like he should have ducked it. You're like, no,
Yeah, right.
that's that's not how that works. And
That's
so I do see
crazy.
things like that, or where police find something where the cyclist violated a law, but it's not enough that a cyclist violates a law. It has to be that law was designed to prevent against that situation that did occur. Take for example, I've had cases where someone's riding in the crosswalk, and they have the walking sign, that says pedestrians can go, and technically you're not supposed to bike in the crosswalk. But the reason you're not supposed to bike in the crosswalk is so that bikes don't hit pedestrians. If a car then runs a red light, they don't get carte blanche because bikes aren't supposed to be in crosswalks. And I see stuff like that, where the police, oh, they were on the sidewalk, or oh, they were in a crosswalk, or whatever it is. But to me, it's always kind of like, the murder victim was committing patent infringement. I guess we have no case. You're like,
Yeah.
no.
Right, right.
Just
Yeah.
because the person was, write them a ticket for being in the crosswalk, whatever, $125, something like that. We're talking about, tens of thousands of dollars of medical bills on the other side. And so I do think there is a bias, because I think that a lot of police and insurance, have what we call like a windshield view. They see the world from the perspective of the driver rather than the cyclist or the pedestrian.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know that that's ever going to change. Not here anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that maybe it gets better over time, but yeah. And I mean, the unfortunate thing is you do see that, but I always tell people, if the insurance company says you're at fault, or the police report says you're at fault, the good news is neither of those is admissible as evidence in court. It's just, those are just two people's unqualified opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
So it doesn't,
the good news too is, I mean, there are a lot of people that are working on it, like
Mhm.
yourself. And then like we had the gal from cowbike.org, and
Yeah.
there's lobbyists in Washington that are doing work to benefit, to improve infrastructure and whatnot for cyclists. And so hopefully we're not totally without hope, but culturally,
Right.
I just don't see that changing.
And
I do think,
go ahead, Kyle, I'm sorry.
I do think one of the best shots we have it is, I see a huge opportunity there with e-bikes. Because I think that, e-bikes have their challenges, and you're getting people going too fast on a bike they're probably not ready to handle.
Yeah.
But you're also getting a lot of people on bikes who might not have otherwise ever been on bikes. And so I do think that, the more people bike in your society, even if it's only like, once or twice a year, the safer cyclists are going to be, because that person is going to, just drive a little safer. Like I think some of the safest drivers in cars are probably people who ride motorcycles, because like, boy, are they aware of the danger.
Yep.
Like I've been passed a couple of times, like, just, like, instead of giving me 3 foot, they gave me 10, and I see the Harley sticker on the back of the truck, and you're like, yeah, there it is.
Yep. Right. They understand.
Yeah, and it's like, it's a
interesting.
different thing, but the same danger, right?
It's interesting you say that. We were talking about the distracted driver thing before, and I think anyone that says that that they don't look at their phone when they're driving at some point is lying, right? We all do.
Right.
But what really broke me of the habit is when I started. I say I have a motorcycle. I have a little Honda scooter.
Yeah.
But it broke me of that habit, because you can't do it when you're on the
Right.
road. Like my phone is in my pocket. And I realized that, geez, I could go from here to Livermore without actually checking my phone. And it really changed it. So to your point, it's very similar to what you were just saying. Like, the people on motorcycles are just, I think, inherently a little bit more sensitive to it.
Well, they also say that part of the reason they think that Europe has fewer traffic fatalities than the United States is also the greater prevalence of manual transmissions over there. It's like, you kind of can't, and I think the same thing is, whether it's a motorcycle or manual, it's like, if you're using both feet and two hands to drive a car, even if you want to check your phone, what do you're a little busy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow. Never thought of that.
Yeah. It's funny. It's like, you don't think about that. You're like, oh yeah, like automatic transmission is obviously, so convenient. You're like, maybe it was nicer. Maybe there is a safety advantage to really being locked into, like, wow, a car is actually kind of hard to drive.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're going the other way. We got auto driving cars. You fall asleep in your Tesla while you're cruising down the highway.
That's right. Yeah.
God help us all. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Jesus. Yeah. I do want to come back to that though, Kyle. You just mentioned something, and that's where I was going to go with the e-bike thing. But and this is where I sound like a broken record and all that. And I think that, yes, hopefully it will get better at time. And I loved your comment about, like, no one's like, oh, volleyball players. I don't know what it is about why people hate us, but until we as cyclists improve our behavior, it's gonna, until we improve our behavior, it's not going to get better until we stop at stop signs and do all that. And unfortunately, I think that there's going to be a bit of a curve, because what I'm seeing, and ties back to my rant before about these e-bikes you don't even have to pedal, and they're doing 28 miles an hour, and it's kids that are riding on sidewalks, and so I think something has to be done, that we have to be better cycling citizens until some of this hatred starts to go away. Sorry, that's my rant, my public service announcement for the day.
Yeah, and I'm with you there. It's like, I joke that, like, I don't know why no one hates volleyball players, and I think that there's an unreasonable amount of hatred directed towards cyclists, even when you're, like, in a bike lane doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. But yeah, I mean, I realize that we are not monolithically perfect citizens right on bikes. Yeah, I get that. The horse people don't like when a mountain bike comes down the trail. And you should stop and yield to them, right? Like, that is the situation, and you should stop at stop signs. I do hope that we get the Idaho stop rule, where you can kind of slow roll it, of course. But yeah, I mean, people doing reckless stuff on bikes, you're not likely to hurt someone else as you are running a red light in a car, but you are more likely to hurt yourself. And cyclists do injure pedestrians, and so I do think that we as the cycling community could be better, more friendly. I love when I see, big group rides coming down the trail near my house, and everyone's calling out on the pass, and, like, there's going to be people who are annoyed either way, even when you're doing the right thing. But like, I always say, like, make their outrage unjustifiable.
Yeah.
It's kind of the best thing we could do. You know, like, if you're being pleasant, you're being polite, you're doing what you're supposed to do, and someone's still mad, well, they're dealing with their own thing.
Yeah.
You know,
That's right.
At that point, that point, they are mad at volleyball players. So, you know, they're mad at the world, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And we've encountered, I mean, I know I've had my share of them. Usually when I'm having a fantastic day, you know, riding my bike on some trail in a park, and then, you know, and I've got this big grin on my face, and I'm just like, hey, how you doing? You know, and then somebody just comes in at you like so off center. It's like, man.
Oh yeah. I've had that in Joaquin Miller. I was like, you know, going up a hill, going real slow. And someone's like, are you even allowed to be biking here? And I was like, yeah, but you have to have your dog on a leash. And, you know, like, they didn't like that.
That's a great one. You know, so I always tell the story, but in Joaquin Miller, same park, I was going up this single track with a buddy of mine, and it was a new trail for me. So I was just following him, you know, and we come across these two hikers, and this one lady, she turns and she puts her hand on her hip, and she just had the stank face, like it was coming. And he said something to her, and then she says, "Oh, bonjour." Well, he said bonjour, and it just like flipped it. And
that's
so
amazing.
I've used this a couple times, and I've had this. Now, that example was like the best version of it, but there's been a couple times where I felt like somebody was going to be mean, and I was just like, "Oh, bonjour." And then I get a bonjour back, and I just keep going, you know.
I'm going to use that. I like that.
Yeah. So
people don't expect it. They think they like, if they're kind of have a grump. If someone comes at you with a grumpy attitude, they expect you to return it. Bonjour.
Yeah.
They're just like, all right, that was actually pretty cute.
You can see them like at the coffee shop later telling their friend, "Oh, we saw these French boys on the trail." You know,
that's right.
You know what I mean? You know,
yeah.
And even if I am doing something totally wrong, I'm from France.
They don't get it. They don't know. Tourists,
right.
you know.
I don't understand the laws here in America. You people are nuts.
That's right.
Yeah. So drop a bonjour on them.
I'm gonna try that myself.
Yeah.
But I do have to tell a story, but I want to be sensitive to time because I know we got a later start. But a really quick story. A buddy of mine, we were doing a ride in Pleasanton, and we were riding back. And we got this one intersection, which was a crosswalk. And of course, we're idiots, and there was a stop sign, and we just blew right through it. And there's this guy walking with his dog. This is God's honest truth. Walking with his dog, and he went off. 30 years I've been out here, and you cyclists never stop at this stop sign, and he just went off, right?
Yeah.
So lesson learned. Every time I would go through that thing, I would, I'd stop. I'd make a group that I'm going to stop, like, because I got written. One time we stopped, and all of a sudden I hear this voice. 35 years I've lived here, and you're the only ones that have ever stopped at this stop sign. There's a God's honest truth.
Yeah.
You made it into the record book.
I did. You're the only one that's ever stopped here. Thank you.
That's why you're so
hard our face.
Yeah, that's why you're making it stop at all the stoplights and stop signs.
Exactly.
One grumpy old dude.
I learned my lesson.
Yeah. Well, maybe that guy needs some therapy.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, Kyle, I unlike Dave, I do have a job, and I know you do too. Yeah.
That's right.
Once an episode, he's got to rag on me about Diet Pepsi or alcohol or my unemployment status. So.
You talk shit with your friends. That's what you do.
That's right. That's right.
So
you don't start a podcast to talk zero shit.
That's right.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. Yep. But Kyle, I want to thank you for coming on, man. It's been really informative, and I'm definitely, anybody out there that's a cyclist, you better take a look at your uninsured motorist coverage, because that could be the difference between going into financial hell, or
Yeah.
not. And so as cyclists, we owe that to our families to make sure that we had the right coverage
Absolutely.
there. And
Yeah.
I don't think anybody, Dave and I didn't know this. We're
Yeah.
50s and 60-year-olds, so not the
Yeah.
smartest guys. Not the smartest guys, but I'm sure a lot of cyclists out there were unaware of that. So that
Yeah.
one little
That's
nugget,
all. Honestly, that's like my big takeaway from
yeah,
anything is like, is that's the best thing you could do to protect yourself. So
yeah, good stuff. All right, and if anybody wants to check you out,
oh yeah.
how do we do that?
Yeah, so it's my practice is called Paceline Law, which this is like probably one of the few audiences I don't have to like fully spell that out and explain
Yeah.
it to. Um, but yeah, I get stuff from the insurance, and it's this case line law. I'm like, no, Paceline Law. They're like,
Yeah.
what's that? I'm like, don't worry about it. Then it's not for you. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I'm pacelinelaw.com or Paceline Law on Instagram, and people can always email me or direct message me or check out my website. Always happy to talk with cyclists, answer questions. I always say, people don't always need to hire a lawyer, but it's always good, to have one to talk to. It's always like nice if your, old college roommate's a lawyer now and you could, ask him a question for free. And I'm trying to be the cycling community's old college roommate who you can ask law questions for free. So,
Oh,
Love
awesome.
that. I love that.
Yeah.
Very
That's great.
generous. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Kyle. And
appreciate having you.
yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. Talk to y'all soon. Bye-bye.
See you later, guys. Peace. Thanks.